Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started for everybody to join. All right, I think I am going to start. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. I hope everyone's doing great. My name is Baptiste. I'm a LCA engineer and I work for BioNova from France. I will be leading today's session. So today we're going to be talking about the RE2020, the new French regulation. So I have some slides to show you at first, and then there will be a short demo. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Can somebody confirm that you can hear me nicely and see my screen once I started to share? All right, amazing. All right, so welcome everybody. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a few rules before we go on. I'm going to ask everyone to please keep your microphone muted during the session. You can ask questions through the Q&A function of Zoom. And Samantha, MT, and Joanna, who are here today to help me out, will be answering your questions throughout the session. I will also take some time at the end to answer the questions that would not have been answered during the session. We will provide you with the slides and the recording tomorrow after the session. So let me figure out how this works, just a second. So there is a LinkedIn group that I advise you to join if you want to keep on the discussion after this session today. You will have the link in the slides that we will be sharing tomorrow. So today's agenda, I will first show you a couple of slides and present you the new regulation, how it's working, what are the novelties when compared to the old one. And at the end, I will show you quickly how the new tool that we've been developing works. So the RE2020 is the new French environmental building regulation. It like all new construction starting from the 1st of January 2022, will need to undertake an LCA and to comply with a set of I'm sorry. So housing, office, and education building will be the first that we need to comply with that new regulation. And in 2023, other typologies will also be included. So office building, for example. So in the slides that you will get tomorrow, you will be able to access different links where you can find out all the documents like that, yeah, describe the methodology and the, I'm sorry, I'm having a bit trouble with my English at the moment. So the RE2020 is following the RT 2012. So RE2020 means environmental regulation, while RT 2012 was a thermal regulation, so only looking at the energy efficiency of the building. So that new regulation, well, basically the novelty is that it will include as well LCA, that we look at the carbon impact, not only the carbon, but with like a strong focus on the carbon impact of the materials that are used in the construction, but not only the components. The scope of the regulation also encompasses the construction side, the energy used during the lifetime of the building, and also the water used. So as I just previously said, the LCA scope of that new regulation covers the entire life cycle of the building. So not only the construction process, but also the life, the use phase and the end of life. The analysis has a focus on CO2, but in total, it's a total of 25 indicators that are covered by the regulation, and GWP is just one of them. So the RE2020 defines a set of contributors that should be included in the analysis. These contributors are going to be components, energy, water, construction, and external areas. So everything that is related to, like the building materials will go into components, while the energy used will be filled in a different query. Construction activities are also accounted for. So energy consumption during the construction, water consumption during construction, but also materials that could be used only during construction will need to be accounted for to get a compliant analysis.
Sorry to interrupt, but we can't see the slideshow. We can just see like the second slide, summer school rules.
Sorry, yes. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I have no idea what's happening. So when I change slides, it makes no difference for you.
No. I think like we don't see the presentation. We just see like the PowerPoint interface.
Is that somehow better now? Jana?
Yeah.
That works now. All right. So then apologize, everybody. I didn't share the right screen. Sorry, I get started again. So the RE2020 is then the new environmental regulation. Well, building, we then need to do an LCA. I mean, like I'm just reading what's on the slides, right? But new construction building, to be able to get the construction permit, will need to comply with certain set of rules. And to do so, they will need to undertake an LCA. First, only single-family houses, apartment buildings, and educational building will need to do the LCA. That is starting from the 1st of January 2022. But starting from 2023, other typologies will be included as well, and we'll need to do the LCA too. So as I said right before, again, sorry, you will have access to these slides tomorrow, and you have a link on that page that gives you access to the documents, the methodology, and the threshold basically that a building should not exceed to be compliant with the regulation. So that is basically what the new regulation is looking at, not only the energy, but also the carbon. So the carbon, like the LCA allows you to basically look at the environmental impact of the component, the construction side, the energy, the water, and also external areas. External areas would be, for example, like parkings and roads that are around the building. So the scope of that new regulation encompasses all the life cycle stages of the building. So A1 to A5 would be for construction, so extraction of the material and construction operation, but the use phase is also modeled with energy and water consumption, as well as maintenance and replacement of construction materials and equipment. And the end of life is also included in the analysis. The reference period for the RE2020 analysis is 50 years. That is a standard reference calculation period that, well, will be the same, and that is part of the regulation, not something you can change or act upon. The regulation evaluates the performances of the building for the carbon impact, so GWP in kilograms of CO2 equivalent, but also for 24 other indicators. So again, as I previously said, the scope covers the components that are used in constructing the building and, well, then maintaining the building, but also the energy and water used during the use phase, the construction step, and the external areas. These are called in the RE2020. These are called different contributors that all contribute to certain life cycle stages of the building itself. So in the French regulation, data are all classified, construction materials, components, so the component contributor. The data that we contribute to that contributor will be organized following lots and sublots. A lot, for example, would be sanitation installation, and sublots would be pipes, for example. All the pipes and network would be in one sublot within that sanitation lot, and then another sublot within that lot would be then taps, toilets, and gather all these data together. That is a way in the French regulation to organize the data and to look at the results to identify what components in the building contribute and how much. In the French regulation, the building can also be divided in different zones. A zone will correspond to a certain activity, a certain use of the space. So if you have, for example, a building that is used for both offices and that also has a restaurant, for example, you will have two zones. One would be the one for the restaurant and the other one for the offices. And that means that in the software in OneClickLCA, when you will be looking at a certain data, you will have to choose a certain zone for that data point, and also to set a certain sublot to organize the data. I will show this and present this in the software a bit later. So the regulation defines a set of indicators. I'm not talking about impacts right now, but indicators. So right now, the indicators that are defined are IC construction, IC energy, IC building, and IC project. IC means indicator, and the C stands for carbon. So these indicators only look at the carbon impact, while other environmental impact are being assessed. The indicators, they focus on the carbon, so the global warming potential. These indicators are defined as kilograms of CO2 per square meter or kilograms of CO2 per occupant. And for two of them, so IC construction and IC energy, there's a threshold that will depend on the building, its surface, and well, that would be the maximum value that should not be exceeded to be compliant with the new regulation. So IC construction is computed based on the impact of the components and the construction operations, while IC energy is computed using from the impact of energy use during the use phase of the building itself. The other IC building and IC projects are measured and should be computed, but there is no threshold. They are indicators of the performance of the building, but there's no maximum value. And so IC building depends on the impact of the components, the building the construction operation, the energy use and water use, while IC project is the sum of the impact of the building and external areas. Because the RE2020 only allows you to use data from the ENIS database, and because the ENIS, the French FDS are still done according to the EN 1584 plus A1, biogenic carbon is not necessarily mentioned separately, declared separately in the EPDs, and most of the time it would be missing. The value for carbon, biogenic carbon, would be missing in the EPD. For that reason, the French regulation, as well, the French government came up with a method to quantify the biogenic carbon in a product when that data is missing from the FDS. So basically, if a data has negative impact, global warming impact for either the stage A1 to A3 or the stage A1, that impact would be converted into a certain amount of carbon. And it would be considered that only biogenic carbon can be the origin of a negative impact for the A1 to A3 stage of a building, a construction material. So the threshold that I defined for IC construction, these thresholds, they are affected by a certain number of characteristics that entirely depends on the building. So the first one, the first thing that will affect the threshold value will be the impact of the foundation and basement. So if the foundation basement has a stronger impact than 40 kilograms of CO2 per square meter, then the threshold will be increased, because it is assumed that, well, like a building should not be penalized because it requires special sets of foundation because of just the place where it's being built. The same way, if roads and infrastructures have an impact like higher than 10 kilograms of CO2 per square meter, the level, the threshold that IC construction should not exceed will be increased as well. And there is also the number of generic data that are used in the analysis that also has an impact on the threshold value. At the moment, a lot of data are missing, so not to penalize the building, the government increases the threshold if a lot of generic data are being used. That is because generic data tend to normally have a stronger impact than the materials you are going to use in the end. And for that one reason, the impact, well, like the threshold is increased to account for that. The surface of the building also has an impact on the threshold. So the lower, like small surfaces and very large surfaces will have, will tend to decrease the threshold value. And climate zones will have an impact as well. So the level will be higher. The IC construction threshold will be higher for what buildings built down in the south of France, As you can see on the graph on the right side of the screen, you also have differences depending on whether it is single family house or an apartment building. So apartment building will tend to have higher threshold values than single family houses. And well, we're still waiting for offices and education, like for threshold for offices and education buildings. This has not, like they have not yet been, well, they're not out yet. So regarding the second indicators that has a threshold, so IC energy, the factors that will affect the value of the threshold are the surface of the building. So lower levels will be allowed for very large surfaces. The climate zone will also have an impact because the level will be higher for colder northeast climate, French climate, and also for high altitude. And in the south of France, the level will be higher as well to account for extra cold production. As well, as I said before, the same way as it had an impact on IC construction, the typology of building will have an impact on the threshold for IC energy. So apartment building will have, again, higher threshold than single family houses, and this will decrease with time as well. So depending on when the building is going to be built, it's going to become more and more stringent. So the threshold will decrease for a building that will be built in 2028 when compared to a building built from 2023, for example. So in the tool, well, the OneClickLCA tool gives you, computes these different indicators, so IC construction, IC energy, and gives you access to the results. So we do compute the performance of the building, and we also compute the threshold levels that should not be exceeded to be compliant. I will show you this later in when I make a demo of the tool. We also compute I'm sorry. Another indicator that the tool allows you to compute is UDD, that is basically describing the use of generic data in the analysis. So the more generic data will be used, the higher that value will be. And that is one of the indicators that should be computed as well to be compliant with the RE2020. Well, as I said before, 24 other indicators than global warming potential are also being assessed. And so 24 other impact categories. And well, the OneClickLCA tool also allows you to look at these 24 other impact categories. So the RE2020 is a regulation that requires a two-step process. The first one will be an energy analysis on the building performances. So what is the building energy consumption throughout the life cycle during the use phase? That is the first step that cannot be completed using OneClickLCA. What OneClickLCA allows you to do is the second step, so the environmental analysis. So the analysis of the environmental performance. And both steps produce an XML document that then are combined using OneClickLCA to produce the RSEE. So that is a summary of both analysis, so both the energy and the environmental performance of the building. And these documents can be created and downloaded from OneClickLCA. So one of the novelty of the RE2020 that is, well, definitely not really common for a life cycle analysis is the dynamic method. So what is usually used across standard in all countries is the static approach. So no matter when the emission will happen, the impact will be the same. While the dynamic method that is using the RE2020 gives more importance to emissions that will happen really early in the life cycle of the building. So that gives more importance to emissions we are sure about than to emissions we don't really know anything about. So emissions at the end of the life cycle will have a lower impact. So the regulation defines as like two functions, one that is applied to the impact from refrigerants and the other one that is applied to other impact from other components. So that means that like the impact of construction material, extraction, construction activities will happen at T0, while the impact from the end of life of the building will happen at T50, for example. And well, 1 kilogram emitted 50 years from now will have a lower impact than 1 kilogram of CO2 emitted at the beginning during the construction process of the building. So the dynamic method affects basically every step past the construction process. So that will be replacement, maintenance of the building, energy use, end of life of construction materials, end of life of the building, and so on. So the dynamic method gives less weight to elements presenting the most uncertainty in LCA. So that, for example, being the end of life and renewal, because 50 years from now, we don't really know how material, like what the end of life of material will be. It makes it possible to valorize products that use recycled materials today, rather than products that potentially can be recycled at the end of their lifetime, because again, of uncertainty. And it recognizes the value of temporary biogenic storage. The problem with the static analysis regarding biogenic carbon storage is that, well, biogenic components that have biogenic carbon storage will tend to have large end-of-life emission because it is considered that the biogenic carbon is re-emitted to the atmosphere. So they will have, well, lower impact and actually negative impact, potentially negative impact for like the extraction of the materials. And so steps A1 to A3 and have really large emissions for the end of life. And well, as I quickly explained before, the emission for the end of life would be reduced because of the dynamic method. So that allows for kind of, yeah, it recognizes the value of biogenic carbon storage. So the RE2020 gives you access to data from, well, allows the use of data from the ENIAS database. The ENIAS database contains three main types of data. The first one being FDES and PEP. So these are the French name for EPDs, environmental product declarations. These are done following the standard NFEN 15804 plus A1 at the moment. These are regular EPDs. The PEP will be for equipment. The ENIAS database also contains rather large amounts of default generic data. These were produced by the government because a lot of materials manufacturers are not yet publishing EPDs, and so to allow the use of, well, to allow the construction company to do an LCA with a lot of missing data, they had to create and come up with this default generic data. They do apply a large safety factor of, basically the impact would be between 30 and 100% higher than what they have initially computed. And that is the reason why, for example, as for now, the threshold value for IC construction will be higher if you use more generic data. That is sort of a way to make it up for the lack of very specific data. But as time passes, because more and more specific data will become available, that, well, increase of the threshold will change and be cancelled, basically. And then the data, the INEAS database also gives you access to a certain set of standard value that you can use to model either a lot or a sublot. So that is a way for construction to basically to model a certain part of the building without having to look into specific data sheet and specific quantities. So these generic data are defined per square meter and allow for a very quick and rough estimation of what the impact could be, for example, for the entire electric equipment of a building, if that is not something the person conducting the LCA has data about. So of course, the regulation advises you to use first specific data, then default generic data. And in the end, if really there's no other way around, to use generic data for entire lot and sublots. So as I mentioned, the RE2020 gives you access to the INEAS database, which is the French EPD program operator. And well, that has published in Europe about more than 4,000 references. The RE2020 also allows you to use EPDs that can be downloaded from approved public tools. So there's a list right in this slide with links that you can then, once you've received the slides, look up. But it allows you to download EPDs that are not on INEAS and then to upload them on in OneClickLCA and then to use them for the analysis. So in the RE2020, the service life of the materials that is being used is the one that is declared in the EPD. The service life can be reduced, but then that needs to be justified. So by default, and most of the time, the service life would be the one of the EPD, not something you choose, really. Materials that are reused can be modeled in the RE2020. So in OneClickLCA, that will appear as checkbox for the materials. And if a material is being reused and modeled as such, then all impacts from that materials will be simply ignored and set as 0. Refrigerant leaks are being modeled in the RE2020 methodology. So yearly leaks and also leaks related to replacement of the equipment. So depending on the quality of the data that is being used to model the equipment itself, there would be different approaches. The first one would be if the equipment that in the FDES for the equipment, there's no data on what refrigerant is being used, then there will be an additional question when looking at, well, when filling in the data for the equipment in OneClickLCA. You will also have to choose the refrigerant that is being used and to input the quantity. If the FDES, so if the EPD for that specific equipment is complete and has detailed the stage impact, then that would not be needed, and the data that would be used would be the one from the EPD. So as for now, OneClickLCA, the tool, the OneClickLCA tool for RE2020 has been approved of this month and is now available for users. The final version will be audited at the end of the year. And while at the moment it is not yet possible to export the RSEE, so the final XML document and report, it will then be available by January 2022, which will be the starting date for using the software. So at the moment, the software is there for users to get used to it and to learn how to use it and how to do an analysis to comply with the RE2020 methodology. And starting from January 2022, the tool will be used, well, could be used, will be compliant with the regulation, and it would be possible to use it to get construction permits. Carbon Designer is one of the models that's being developed by OneClickLCA and is also available in the RE2020 with a specific French building model and specific data as well. We also have compiled a step-by-step guidance that are available on our support center in French. So where all the steps to perform the RE2020 analysis are described. So I'm going to now go ahead and show you how the tool works and how it looks like at the moment. That's okay. Can you all see, or can someone confirm that you can see the screen?
Yeah, I can see it perfect.
Thank you, Jana. So that is an example of a project that has been, well, conducted in the RE2020 tool that OneClickLCA has developed. So as you can see, that like the data are organized following the contributors that the RE20 defined, the methodology defined. So building materials are, all data related to building materials will be entered in a specific query, while energy and water will be filled in a different query. So the way the tool works is you search for a certain EPD for a certain product, construction product here, using the search bar. The tool only gives you access to the ENIAS database, as this is the only one that is compliant with the tool. Yeah. Well, sorry about that. But so you, using the search bar, you can find the data that are available on the ENIAS database. Then you should fill in the quantity. So for the full building, or at least for the zone, that, well, because if the building has different zones, then materials quantity should be filled in separately for the different zones. So then you can input the quantity, select the zone for which the materials corresponds to, and then set the lot or sublot. You also have the possibility to change the service life of the building. Again, as I mentioned before, only you can reduce the service life, not increase it. And if you do so, then you will need to explain and, well, explain why the service life of the material has been reduced when compared to the one on the EPD. By default, the one you will have in the software will always be the one from the EPD. If the material is being reused, you will have that checkbox. So as you just saw, the impact dropped to 0 as soon as I clicked the reuse material checkbox. So in that project, all data have been already pre-filled. So what you can see is, well, all data already have a zone number and sublot. Once you have added all the data for your building, all the components, the construction materials that are used for your building, you can proceed to the energy and water query. That is where you will fill in energy consumption and water use for the use phase of the building. So these data should be filled in, well, per year. give me a minute for the software to load. Apologize, it's really slow. So here it is. Energy consumption values need to be filled in per square meter per year for the building. In the final version of the tool, so the one that will be available starting from well, at the beginning, like at the end of December 2022, 2021, apologize, it would be possible to get these values of energy consumption straight from the airset document. That function is not yet available for the RE2020 tool. So right now, energy consumption value need to be filled in manually, depending, well, different resources exist and are available on ENES, depending on the use of energy and whether it is electricity, gas, or public heating network, and so on. Water consumption needs to be filled in separately as well. And it's not only water consumption, but also the sanitation and, or like the wastewater treatment process that need to be filled in as well. So in that case, 182 cubic meter of drinking water consumed annually by the building. So, and the same amount is being treated. So 2 rows for the same work input, because it's also an output. Then materials, energy, water consumption related to construction activities needs to, well, be filled in because they are part of the scope of the analysis. So drinking water will, yeah, data will need to be collected for drinking water, same for electricity. And earthworks also need to be documented for the analysis. So any like soil that we need to be evacuated, transported, or soil that we need to be imported to, well, for the use of the building. All these earth movements will need, well, like soil movement will need to be documented and accounted for, because, and the impact, well, and a certain impact would be computed. That accounts for basically the use of fuel for the machineries that will be moving around the soil and for transport of the soil as well. All components that are specific to the construction activities will also be accounted for. These are components that cannot be specifically linked to a certain construction materials, because if they are linked to one specific construction materials, then they should already be accounted for in the EPD of that material. Production of energy should also be modeled in OneClick for the RE2020 tool. So that would mean any photovoltaic production of energy or cogeneration. So production, but also self-consumption of that energy. And the impact of the production of energy will be allocated based on the self-consumption rate. So only the impact from producing that can be basically an allocation will be done based on the self-consumption rate, and only the share well, the impact from the equipment that is being used will be shared between the building and the grid, depending on the self-consumption rate. And the last, well, previously last query of the RE2020 tool in OneClick is the building description query. So in that query, you are going to, well, users will define the reference surface for each zone. If there are multiple zones, so multiple uses for that one building, so for example, restaurants and offices, or well, a school with a restaurant as well, then well, there will be different zones with different surfaces, and then a certain set of parameters need to be defined. These can be computed for each zone, and these will affect the maximum, the threshold values for IC construction and IC energy. So these different parameters, they are reflecting what I mentioned before would affect the threshold values. So the localization, like the geographic position of the building, for example, or the area. So these parameters need to be computed separately and will then affect the maximum values that the IC construction and IC energy can attain to be compliant with the regulation. So the last query is the discounting scenario. So here you have the choice to do or not do the dynamic LCA method. To be compliant with the RE2020, the dynamic method should be not selected. So just to quickly say it again, the dynamic method is the novelty of the regulation, and it basically decreases the impact that will happen further in the future. So this is how the result page looks like. So results are organized in, well, depending on the different contributors. So you will have also the performance of the building itself. So the indicators IC construction and IC energy will appear in the result table. The impact from the components, from the water use will also be there in two different, well, with two different values, one being the static method, so that is the previously last column on the right, while the second column with numbers, the global warming kilograms CO2 equivalent, this corresponds to the dynamic method. So as you can see, the impacts with the dynamic method are lower than the impact with the static method, except for example, like IC chantier, which corresponds to the impact from the construction site. Because the construction site is, well, the construction activities and the impact is happening at T0, then there is no dynamic, well, dynamic method does not impact the result from the analysis for the construction activities, but it does for the components because of the removal of the components, the maintenance, and it does as well for the energy or water, for example. The maximum values are computed as well. So as I mentioned before, these maximum values, they depend on a certain set of parameters that need to be computed and filled in the previously last query, so the building description query. And these are the legal threshold that the building should not exceed to be compliant with the regulation. So they should be compared with the dynamic results, not the static results. So this also allows you to look at what the result per zone. So in my case, only have, or in this specific case, only have a single zone. So not much information here, but results can also be looked at for the different lots. So that is the interest of the different lot. It allows you to organize the data and look at the result to find out what part of the building to optimize to reduce the environmental impact and be compliant with the regulation. You also here have the results of UDD, basically, that is an indicator that measures the use of default data. So not FDES, or PEP, but the other ones. And then all other impact categories you can see in that section here. So there are 24 in total, which are organized in different tables. And again, the results are organized like depending on the different contributors. Results can also be looked at in different graphs that are available at the bottom of the page, with the possibility to extract the data and to get the different tables that are used to create these graphs. I'm going to quickly go back to the building material query to show you how you can look at look at the different access the EPDs that is used for a certain data point. So, and also show you the difference between the different data types that you can use and that you have access to from the ENEAS database. So if you select a certain data point and you want to use it for your modeling, what you can do is check out the FDES that was used that it corresponds to. So by clicking on the green question mark on the right-hand side of the name of the data points, you can download the EPD. So in that case, that is here is a proper EPD, so French FDES, as you can see here. But others will be different because you're gonna have as well some DED, so environmental default data, which at the moment I can't find. This one, for example, would be an environmental default data. So this is something that the French government created, a declaration that the French government created that is not from a specific manufacturer. And well, these are the major differences. I think I said what I wanted to say. So if any of you have questions, this for me would be the time for you to ask. And I'm looking at the questions that have not been answered yet right now and try to provide you with proper answer. Dimitrios, I'm not sure I understand your question. Do we have any updates regarding the exam receipt? So Daria, could you please give just a little bit more on EPDs download from public sites? They're not a part of ENEAS, but still can be used. So they're not part of ENEAS, but yes, they can still be used. I personally never did it, but I had some clients, many clients using it. Any of these websites allows you to basically model a variation of some construction materials, and the result from that modeling, from that OneClickLCA, I would say, will be an XML document. So the same, that will have exactly the same format as the INES data. And then you can, using the software, using the company account, you will be able to upload that XML document to the software and to use it afterward. So that, for example, would be if I download an XML document from one of these websites, and then I want to use it in my software, I would just choose the XML file. Let's say this one, import it. And I have now added this chape non fibré of 5 centimeters thick, which is not an INES data point, but that I can use right now in the software if I want to. So if I look, I now have that specific point that is that was downloaded from Betty. So that is one of these websites you can use to create FDES. And as you can see, there's nothing I can download here because it's not an EPD nor DED. But you do have the environmental profile there. So it is the same, but it is equivalent to an INES datasheet, but that sort of like you created yourself using one of these websites rather than something that was published by a manufacturer. So Daria, you asked what will be the timelines for submitting documentation of compliance with RE2020? Will it be just prior to commencement of work? So if compliance documentation is approved, the construction works can start, or will it be a tender stage of the project? I personally don't know the answer to the question. I'm sorry. That is something I can reach out a bit later and tell you. But at the moment, I don't know. I don't know if any of the panelists knows. I don't know if John, are you're aware of when the documentation needs to be submitted, but I don't. And then there's another question. I have a question regarding the reference surface area, surface de référence. As this is, well, that is the area, for example, that is used to compute the impact from energy, like the energy consumption, because the energy consumption should be computed for, is evaluated per square meter. And well, then to get the impact, we multiply that value per square meter with the reference area surface. And again, Daria, I don't have more information than what is in the regulation itself. So it is something, that we'll need to discuss further via email, if that's fine for you. Will the selection of, so Daria, you're asking, will the selection of resource when using RE2020 add-on be limited to INES, FDES, PEP only, or do we need to check every resource to make sure it's compliant? No, so the tool only gives you access to, well, tool compliant data. So in that case, that would only be INES and like the INES database. And the INES database will contain FDES, PEP, and so on. So you will only get access to the INES database, and that then will only be, well, FDES, PEP, DED, and so on. But then only compliant, data compliant with the tool. Is there any other questions? And there's one question, Elaine. I'm sorry for the way I say your name. Has OneClick been tracking builders who are leading the way on highest reduction for each country and so on? Is any of the panelists able to answer the question? Because I am not.
Hello, so it's Joanna. It's might be a bit off topic. We have like the Carbon Hero benchmark, which basically gives you average data on building, depending on region and on also on typology of building, which can give you an idea of where your building is compared to like thousands of our like projects. So it's not really like which are like who are the most successful customers, but more like averages, which can be very useful. Yeah, I don't think I have any better answer.
Feel free to ask any other questions you may have. If there's something, I don't know, I know there was a lot I wasn't really clear about. So if you would like me to go back to some slides to give you more details on the dynamic method, what are the novelties with the RE2020 regulation, that's something I'm really happy doing. So E plus and minus. So Daria is asking, Baptiste, could you please explain a bit E plus and minus? E plus and minus was an experiment that led to the RE2020. So it is like the methodology was different, and it was, well, it was an experiment to come up with that new regulation. So it is different from the RE2020 tool because the methodology has changed. The dynamic method, for example, was not part of, well, was not part of the methodology for E plus and minus. It is now with the RE2020. The scope of the analysis was pretty similar. One of the main difference in the scope is now that the external areas are being included in the scope of the RE2020. So roads that give access to the building itself, fences around the project will need to be included as well. That was not the case before.
If I can add a little about it.
Go on.
For the RE2020 is for now only for limited typology of building. And the typology will be like completed along the way by the organization doing it. And so in the meantime, if you want to do LCA for your buildings that don't have, for which the typology are not available yet, you can use E plus A minus instead of like RE2020 while it's not available there.
Does that answer your question, Daria? Or was there something else you wanted us to? Well, the tools are going to look the same and they will be able to communicate with one another. So it would be possible to rather easily do an analysis with E plus A minus and RE2020 for the same building. So most data will be able to transfer from one tool to the other one. The results will be a lot different. Some additional data will need to be considered, of course. So what I said before regarding the external areas, for example, then the calculation method with the dynamic, so like the dynamic approach. So then the results also will be different because of that. But no, I mean, like they will be pretty similar. Some data will be different as well. I'm thinking especially about the standard values for certain load and subload, what we call load forfaitaire in French. This will then be different, like the values per cubic meters. The low and subload classification has also evolved a bit between E plus and minus to RE2020. So there are some minor differences, but the tools will look the same pretty much, and the information you need to fill in will be very similar as well. So yes, there are the except like the boundaries, except for external areas, will be the same. The life cycle, well, the lifetime, the reference period will be 50 years. Yes. The boundaries, the scope is the same for E plus A minus and RE2020. The methodology for A5 will be well, very similar. So in A5 data from the EPDs will be used just as they were in E plus A minus, and well, in addition, there will also be the A5 of the building will also depend on whatever information has been filled in the construction query. So fuel, energy, and water consumption related to the construction activities. So that is similar to what was done with the plus and minus experiment. For B7, Joanna, I'm not sure. I'm not going to say something wrong. So
yeah, no problem. Just one addition for the A5. The only new thing that changed for the RE2020 is that now we can have specific materials for the construction sites, like temporary material that are used specific for the construction site, which is not available, and not an option in E plus A minus. And for the water, it still works the same way, that in terms of giving quantity, like the cubic meter of water used. We will have a calculator in beginning of 2022 to help calculate this water quantity. And as about now, for the E plus A minus, in our help center, we have also an Excel calculator that can help you calculate the water quantity for E plus A minus. I don't know if I answered correctly, but yeah.
So Daria or anyone else? Any more questions for Joanna or for me? Default values from OneClickLCA cannot be used for the RE2020 tool. basically the electricity consumption, you will need to have data on your own for electricity consumption for construction activities. You will have the session recording, yes, tomorrow, along with the slides that contain the link to the regulation and other related documents in case you want to take a look. Daria, I'm not sure exactly what are we talking about right now. We're talking about water or for A5. There is no calculator. There are guidelines in the software to help you understand. I mean, like basically what the regulation presented like as guidelines. Basically, we've copied what the regulation, the guidelines from the regulation in the software itself. So you've been guided in computing, for example, I don't know what, like the fuel consumption per cubic meter of soil that's being moved or and so on. But we do not give anything sort of in addition or on the top of what the regulation provided as guidelines for computing energy and water and so on consumption for A5. Basically, we are sticking to the regulation and not giving something in addition because we just simply don't know how to do such thing. Okay, so there's a question how to select the RE2020 in software. So that would be once you've created a project, if you're creating a project, that would be at the top of any of the window, you have that add button, then building. And once you've created a project, that means give it a name, link it to the license. And that probably is the most important step, to link it to the license that you have access to. But once you've created your, well, actually, I'm just going to do it. So I'm now creating a building.
You're not sharing your screen anymore.
I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Thank you, John. So at the top of any screen, you have the add button, then building opens up the window that allows you to create a new project. So the first thing you got to do is link it to the license, because that will then give you access to the different tools the license gives you access to. Sorry. Then you have to give it a name. And I'm going to jump over the next steps to move a bit faster. But once you've done this, you get to the main page of the project, and on the Get Started button, you will then have access to the RE2020 tool, providing that your license gives you access to the tool itself. That is how it works, and then you really need to create a new design. And so on. That is, if you start from scratch, if you already have a project, let's say with E+ A-, and you just want to add a new tool, then that will be here on the tools, available calculation tools, and then you can select RE2020. I hope that was clear. Anyone else has a question about either well, the regulation or the way the project, like the software works. Thank you, Daria. Well, then, if there's no other questions, thank you everyone for attending the session. Thank you, Joanna, Samantha, and Nancy for your help very much. There's a question. So the reason why you only have 3 options is because at the moment, your license doesn't give you access to that one tool. So what I would recommend you do is reach out to customer support to discuss that issue. Thank you all for being here today, and yeah, have a very good day and see you at the next session. Goodbye.